Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm here with another video where I am documenting my research process and sharing it with you. In this video, I'm going to go through some initial data around patch 1419 to get an initial assessment on how things have changed and how that should affect how we play. Before we get started, I wanted to actually share some comments that came up recently. One comment was, how are you going to teach me if you're learning TFT? And I actually really like this quote, who dares to teach must never cease to learn, by John Cotton Dana. And it again goes back to the best teachers are the ones that are continuously learning. And if you're not learning anymore, you're no longer fit to be able to teach. Another comment that was saying this whole time, I thought you were a plat player. Uh, and a point I want to make is that by actually documenting and sharing my learning journey, it actually has helped me improve a lot. Someone also mentioned you can't seriously be trying to improve and not be at least GM. Uh, I mean, that's not fully true, but for the most part, if you're really serious about getting better and are continuously improving each day, like you might have come across the get 1% better each day formula. Like if you get 1% better each day, you'll be 38 times better within a year. So just being willing to constantly improve is going to help you move up in the ladder if that's something you're interested in doing. It also reminds me of one of my favorite books on just improvement called Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. And some of the quotes that I really like here are bolded, like creativity is always a collaboration. And that's part of why I'm interested in doing this, like kind of interacting with the community. If these videos and the comments can become almost like a discussion group where I would love to hear your feedback on kind of my analysis and the hypotheses I'm making. The comments would be a great place where we can kind of have that collaborative creativity. The best way to get started is to show your work. Think about what you want to learn and make a commitment to learning in front of others. That's something that I want to be able to do. And just every day, go back to your documentation and find a little piece of your process that you can share. And so that's kind of what I am trying to do here, is to be open in sharing my learning journey and how that goes. So related to that, I kind of want to experiment with just sharing how every time I make a video, how my recent games are going, what I'm learning, and using that as a way to be able to be helpful to you. I don't want to just share times where I'm spiking in my LP. I want to share times that I'm also free falling and just crashing. So yesterday I played like 11 games, and one big kind of lesson from just looking at this here is that I played one game of Callista of like 11. This one doesn't really count since it was multi-striker reroll. And Callista was like by and large the best comp in the game. The thing was I was getting super bored of playing Callista, and it was hyper contested every game. The meta was just super dry. What I should have done if I really cared about LP was just stop playing or play on a Smurf account. And that's a big lesson from just looking at this day's game. I was just getting really tired. And so I'm glad that this 1419 is here. So we're going to jump into, if you just want to look at the high level, here's a quick image. Most of this in the data didn't make a difference, and we'll dive into the specific data. Gwen got better, Fairy got nerfed, and Royal Guard nerf. But for the most part, the meta didn't shift too much. What we'll notice when we look at the data is the play rates on certain comps really changed. Another page I really like to look at the start of a new patch is Tactics.tools has this trends feature. If you go to stats and trends, and you can see a high level picture of what changed. And I kind of did a more detailed analysis of this by comp and by unit. But you can see at a high level here, like Sugar got better. Jinx and Wukong reroll is a little bit more viable now. Karma, Fiora, Preserver has gotten a lot better. And over on this side, like Ziggs reroll got nerfed. It caps out a lot lower. 6 Sugar Craft is actually playable now. it's better. I think it's like at 4.5 at Masters Plus or maybe Diamonds Plus. So at lower elos, 6 sugar is definitely playable, though at higher elos, it's still not great. 6 Warrior got a big buff. So if you get Warrior Emblem, Warrior Reroll is now playable. And then some of these verticals got nerfed. Otherwise, there's not too much change across the board here. And we're going to dive straight into my analysis. So this data is all filtered by GM Plus. So one thing to consider for 14.19, I'm recording this video 11 hours after the patch has been released. I think I'm Pacific time, so I'm not exactly sure what, I think it's midnight, but I'm not exactly sure when the patch was released. So the sample size on the 14.19 data is going to be a little bit small because I'm filtering GM Plus here. But I broke down by comp the most popular or filtered by top 4 shares, since that's kind of indicative on what's kind of playable most of the time. Like if you're gated by hero augment, then the top 4 share is just going to be low. So this is kind of a holistic picture on things. I just realized you can't see this. Okay, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. All right, we can see this now. Okay, so I have it filtered by GM Plus. The comps here, 14.19 data, 14.18 data, and you can like click into these to go to the comp on MetaTFT. And I'll share the link to this spreadsheet in the comments. So I have the top 4 share, average place, pick rate, win. Pick rate is like how popular it is. And then over here, I have the diff across 14.19 to 14.18. Green usually indicates it's better. Red usually indicates it's worse. And we'll go into it. So first off, the biggest nerf of this patch was the nerf to the 5 fairy armor healing, which applies mostly to Rakan. And we'll go into forecast impact next. But you can see that the average placement actually didn't change much and actually improved, but the pick rate decreased by 1.02, which means that there's one whole less player per game. There's only half a player per game playing 5 Fairy Kalista right now, which I suspect is why the average place has actually gotten slightly better. Overall, we should expect that this comp is worse because Rakan just can't drain tank and sustain in the fight as much as he could in the past. But the reason I suspect that the average placement went down and the win rate is about the same is probably because you are just far less contested for Kalista now. The pick rate was, you had 1.5. Sometimes in my challenger lobbies, I had 3 or 4 players angling Kalista, which going back to my games yesterday was why I was just getting burnt out and bored out of my mind playing Kalista. But my guess is that that's why this average place, it's just so much easier to hit your Kalista too now, especially if you're uncontested, that it's probably more of an A bottom of S tier comp. But if you're uncontested, especially if you have Emblem or Royal Guard, it is probably still S tier. And given this pick rate, I suspect that Kalista is underplayed now and still quite good, which is to my dismay because I just don't want to see any more Kalista. Next, we have Varus, who was the second highest top 4 share in last patch, but the highest win rate. So it actually has the highest cap, because if you can get all of the Arcana units in and cap out with Xerath, then that Xerath, with, especially if you have Archangel with Varus splashing kind of backline, could take out the Kalista before the enemy karma. So like last patch, it was, and still true this patch, you would have like a super strong frontline here, and then you would have your Kalista in the back line. And especially if you were like same side or you could second row, then Varus could hit a clump here and do some damage to Kalista. And then Xerath could hit the backline and kill the backline before this Rakan just kind of infinitely scales. So backline access against Kalista is extremely important, which is why, this has the highest cap from last patch. And you can see that it still has the highest cap with 15.2%, only rivaled by 8 Portal. So last patch, Varus was very strong. And this patch, you can see that the top 4 share went up. I'll just do the diff. Average placement is slightly lower. And I suspect that's because the pick rate went up by a good amount. And the win rate went down slightly. It's not clear to me why the win rate went down slightly. And maybe it's just, again, associated with the pick rate going up so much. Like you might start having 2 or 3 people contesting Varus every game. So I suspect now that the game's more balanced, being able to scout your lobby to see what lines people are taking, looking at the item slams in stage 2 to kind of figure out which direction to angle is probably really important in this patch. Next, we have Preserver Karma, which was really strong in previous patch. Doesn't need Witchcraft, but you can also flex between Fiora, Gwen, and usually before you have Morgana, you throw in like Neeko with Nasus here. But Neeko Nasus is flexible. You could also flex in instead of Fiora, Gwen, you can flex in Olaf and Twitch. You get 3 Frost with Zillion. And this is much cheaper. Olaf can hold the Fiora items. You don't even need these 2. You could play Milio as well at some point since you get Scholar. And if you have a strong front line, then you could even take out all 4 of these and just play 4 and 4 with Milio here. So this board is really flexible. It doesn't require conditions to play. By the way, for Arcana Varus, Arcana and Blaster emblems make it cap out a lot higher, which will contribute to a much higher win rate here. But this top 4 share, basically Preserver Karma has the highest top 4 share now. So it is if you do not have a clear direction and some condition that makes it much easier to play another comp, Preserver Karma seems to be the most obvious comp to default toward. The average placement went down by nearly 0.2 from 4.55 to 4.36. And given that the win or the pick rate spiked by 0.3 and the top 4 share, the average place, and the win rate went up, I suspect that Preserver Karma is just hands down the best comp in the game right now. It doesn't cap as high as this, but from a percentage of games you should be playing, this was something that Bosso Skills taught me, is you should be looking at your games, and you can even go to units last 20 and look at the number of games you've played. Like I played 5 Kalista games in my last 20, which arguably, given that my average placement, top 4 rate and win rate was quite good with him, or her, I should have been playing Kalista way more. And that's a way that you can kind of assess this data, is in which percentage of games you should angle certain comps and how to be able to identify situations that you would want to go in a certain comp direction. So next we have 7 Frost. That's just vertical frost. It's something that you're probably all very familiar with. For the most part, you're gated by the Frost emblem since it's hard to hit. I did not link this properly. I'll fix that later. It's hard to hit Diana. So that Frost emblem really helps you stabilize. Frost was nerfed, but you can't really see that much in the data. The top 4 share went down slightly. Average placement didn't change much. None of this stuff really changed much. So Frost wasn't impacted that much. I believe the Frost Soldier explosion damage would decrease slightly, but there wasn't overall too much change to Frost. It's especially strong with the Frost emblem and the Augment Winter is coming. Preserver Rise didn't really change much in the data. It performs better with Emblem and higher education. Part of the reason that Preserver Karma and Preserver Rise, I suspect, got much better too, is that there are way fewer Callista players taking your Preservers, especially Rakan, out of the pool. Before, it would, even if you wanted to play Preserver Karma, there'd be like 2 or 3 Callista players, and then maybe 1 or 2 Preserver Karma or Rise players. So then Rakan was like heavily contested, so it would just be really hard to stabilize. So now that the meta is a little bit more balanced, I suspect that's why Preserver Karma and Preserver Rise are better. The key thing with Karma is that you can play Karma with Fiora, Olaf, like the melee carries, and Fiora Gwen got much better because Gwen got better, and we'll see that when we look at the forecast. But Rise, you mainly play with 4 Scholar, so Rise didn't benefit as much from the Warrior boost, specifically to Gwen. Multi-Striker reroll. This is 7 Multi-Striker. See if we can also pull up Rise really quick. Yeah, so you want to play the 4 Preserver, 4 Scholar board. And then Multi-Striker reroll is vertical Multi-Striker. You play towards 7. Also, given that 5 Fairy Callista has decreased in frequency, and a lot of, well, the standard board will have Hecarim in it in that 5 Fairy board. Hecarim becomes less contested, and so going for a Hecarim 3 is more viable, though usually you're probably playing around like a Ashe 3, Jax 3, Kassadin 3. But if you are in the right scenario and could go for a Hecarim 3, he's going to be less contested because this went from a 1.5 to a 0.48 play rate. So if we look at Multi-Striker reroll, the average placement improved by 0.13. Pick rate went down, which is also interesting because it'll be easier for you to hit your Callista later in the game after you've hit your early game 3 stars. And the top 4 share went down. I suspect top 4 share went down because pick rate went down. But this seems pretty viable, especially if you have Unleash the Beast for Hecarim is really good. 8 Portal, the stats are pretty similar except for the win rate went up. So it went from 13.7 to 15.2 to rival Varus. And for both of these, as well as Preserver Karma, these increased win rates, 1.8 diff, 2.1, 1.5, as well as these down here, is probably in large part due to the decrease in frequency of the Callista board. Given that, especially if you look at Multi-Strikers, the way that it wins the fight is a very fast-paced take them down quickly, kind of like set 11 challengers. And if that board is facing this Callista Fairy board who has a Rakan 2, Callista 2, like 4 Preserver, the Hecarim, even if you get Hecarim 3, it was sometimes quite hard to get through that Rakan. So I suspect that this win rate went up because it can handle the Callista board much better. And there's just fewer of that board running around. Same thing, 8 Portal seems like it has a high cap now with Fairy being weaker. It's conditional upon the emblem, so you definitely can't play this most of the time. But if you get the emblem, it's very strong and has a high cap. Arcana Rise is pretty weak. It didn't really change across the board. It's inferior to the Preserver Rise version. Pull that. So this Arcana Rise, this version here listed also has a Scholar. So usually you're playing it with 4 Scholar. Didn't really change much across the board. Usually you're just going to play Preserver. But if you're angling Rise, you hit an early Rise, and let's say there's a bunch of people playing Callista for maybe this win or pick rate picks up. And then let's say there's a bunch of people playing Preserver Karma. If there's just a lot of Rakans already out of the pool, then you kind of just need to use Arcana as your backup frontline in the form of TK and Hecarim. Ziggs reroll was secretly very strong last patch, had a 4.09 average place. It didn't really cap out that high, but had a very good top 4 rate average placement. In this patch, Honey and Ziggs were both nerfed, so it went down to a 4.33, but it's still a solid like top 5 play, especially if you have if you hit a bunch of Blitz and Ziggs earlier, you have Zap Attack. I would only go in this direction now if you already hit a ton of them early, can try to hit your Ziggs 3, Blitz 3 ahead of tempo. But you can see that the cap also went down a lot, like went from 11 to 8%. Part of that, I suspect, is given that Preserver Karma is a lot more prevalent, and that plays around warriors like Fiora Gwen. Ziggs really relies on sniping the backline carries and then winning the fight from there. But when you have warriors jumping around, 4-cost tanky healing warriors running around, Ziggs can burst them, but then they'll heal back up and like be running to a different direction. So Ziggs can't keep on hitting the same target. So I suspect that's why the win rate has decreased here. Jinx and Wukong reroll was just horribly bad last patch. 4.88 average. The average placement for Jinx and Wukong increased the most, or decreased, so which is got better by the most. But it's still like only averaging right in the midpoint. Pick rate went up slightly, and the win rate went up slightly. So most of the time, you're not going to go for this because it's so expensive. It's really hard to hit. And if you hit, the cap is not great. It's very conditional upon hitting either Hunter Emblem, Hunting Frenzy, or Category 5. I believe in the stats that those scenarios change this from like a 4.5 to like a 4.2, or maybe slightly better than that. So this is conditional. Warrior got buffed. Oh, so for Jinx and Wukong, they got better because Jinx and Wukong were both buffed, and I believe Sugar was buffed, but that might be just 6 Sugar. So this is what the board looks like. And that Warrior reroll is usually 4 Warrior. If you get Emblem, that 6 Warriors is especially strong. But 4 Warrior reroll is also really bad. Previously at 4.85, went down to 4.5. It does cap higher than Jinx and Wukong. So if you can hit your Katarina, basically if you can hit all your Warrior 3 stars and then get your 4-cost to 2 stars, because Gwen got better and you don't have the Rakan that is so hard to take down in the front line, this comp got better. It is, I would still say, conditional on Emblem or just hitting a ton of your warriors early. Like that Warrior Emblem makes a big difference. I think it brings it down to like a 4.2 or 4.1. And Unleash the Beast is especially strong, like on Fiora, on Akali in the early game. Neela, if you could get Akali or Neela 3, are really good. And then last week we have Kog'Maw reroll, which had a really low play rate. And even here, I would say I would maybe not look too much at these stats because the play rate is so low. Same with Ziggs. These stats may be not that accurate in 14-19 so far. I would say it was more reliable in 14-18 because this was off of like 4 days of data. This is off of like half a day's worth of data. But you can see it didn't really change much. It's still quite reliable. The average placement got slightly better. Hunting Frenzy, basically a lot of the same stuff that is good for Jinx reroll is good for Kog'Maw reroll. So if you get any of those, the Emblem, the Augments, then you can kind of lean towards one of these directions. And again, these are probably more viable from an average placement standpoint, both because for Jinx and Wukong, they got buffed, but also because like Jinx especially is a scaling fight kind of strategy with a super strong front line and a super strong back line. The only thing was last patch, Kalista 2 and Rakan 2 was just better than Jinx 3 and Wukong 3. So even though this is harder to hit, you would still hit it and still lose out to this, which may not be true anymore, which I suspect is why it's gotten better. So next we're going to go into the units. So I'm primarily just looking at forecast since this is still primarily a forecast meta. Maybe that will change as people adjust more to this patch. But right now I did again 1418, 1419 in the diff. I was using Meta TFT's stats here, so it's off of frequency of play. I believe this is frequency of games where these units show up in. So we have average placement, win rate, frequency. Rakan, well, we could just kind of look at this right side here. The frequency of Rakan decreased because the fairy comp, 5 fairy comp got nerfed, and therefore his play rate has decreased. So before, Rakan was the highest frequency tank and Tahm Kench was second. Now Tahm Kench is highest, Rakan's second. But still, Rakan is the most flexible frontline right now. You can play it with Preserver Karma, Rise. You can play it with 5 Fairy Callista. And then also Fiora and Gwen are kind of played with the Karma comp. So Rakan is just extremely flexible and you can play it with almost any backline carry. Callista was very strong last patch. The frequency went down by 14%. And that kind of, you can see that in the comps section on 5 Fairy Callista. The win rate, average place and win rate didn't really change much. Again, I think that the reason for that is because his play went down so much that it's easier to hit Callista too, which means that like that maybe neutralized the nerf to that comp. Karma, average placement improved, win rate improved, frequency went up by 5%. I suspect that Karma is not played enough, given that the frequency increased, but the win also increased. Usually if the frequency goes up, it's harder to hit and the win rate and average placement take a hit, but these two went up a good amount with the frequency rise. And we haven't hit the point, I don't think, that frequency is stable. This maybe should go up to like, I don't know, 25%, like where Callista was previous patch. Given how flexible Karma is, it's the most flexible backline carry. You can play with Fiora, Gwen, Olaf. You can even play with Rise because if you're playing Preservers, Karma and Zilean have the Chrono, and then Bard and Rise have Scholar. So if you have Karma items slammed early and then you're trying to figure out a secondary carry, you could just really be flexible depending on the item components that you get. Fiora got a huge boost. Its AVP went from 4.61 to 4.38. I think this is largely due to Gwen's buff indirectly buffing Fiora. So she became the strongest melee carry. Before that was Olaf, but now that's Fiora. Win rate went up by 2%. Frequency jumped by almost 8%. So the fact that similar to Karma, the fact that the average place and win rate went up by a good amount and the play rate went up by like 50% suggests to me that this is still underplayed. Tahm Kench, similar stats, not too much change. Tahm Kench, you're mainly playing around Arcana Varus frontline. It's going to be highly contested. So if you think about for like, let's say Preserver Rise, it's still probably going to be easier to hit your Rakan than it is your Tahm Kench. I suspect because Varus is so heavily contested now. And we'll talk about Varus in a sec. Olaf, average placement went down. Win rate is the lowest out of any forecast. And the frequency went up. So it has a low cap, low play rate in the 14%. Olaf Twitch is cheaper alternative to Fiora Gwen on the Preserver Karma board. So if you have Fiora items, you don't hit Fiora because Fiora is like almost double contested compared to the frequency is almost double the play rate of Olaf. And I suspect that this will go up. It's just a really cheap alternative to Fiora and Gwen, which can help you push level 9 faster. And then if you hit Fiora later, you can move items, or let's say you hit like a Briar 2 or a Camille 2 at level 9, then you could just move the items over. So usually I suspect Olaf is still quite good in stage 4 and 5. you just don't want to finish the game with Olaf. Gwen was the worst forecast in last patch, and then now her average placement increased the most and her win rate increased the most. And you can see here that Fiora and Gwen they're like the forecast warrior partners. So if Gwen gets better, then Fiora got better. And the frequency increased about the same amount. So I suspect that like 4.43 is like not great. So Gwen's still better, but you still want to prioritize itemizing Fiora over Gwen. And then Six Sugar has also improved, but still isn't really playable at high elos unless you have like the perfect spot for it. Taric didn't really change much. You're mostly playing Taric on a Preserver Rise board or a Vertical Portal board, but you're usually not angling those by default. Varus didn't really change much across the board. The frequency of play went up by 1%. Varus has the highest cap as far as backline carries go, 13.6% win rate compared to 13.4 for Fiora. But he's going to be the most contested carry at 25%. So given these stats, I suspect that Fiora Karma, given the average placement, like Varus has a higher win rate, but a lower AVP. So like it's more of a first or eighth kind of strategy, or maybe first or second or 6th, 7th. Whereas Karma Fiora is just going to be more consistent, which indicates to me that this frequency should go up and this maybe should stay the same. Rise didn't really change across the board. He's the least contested backline carry, excluding Nami. Like Nami doesn't really have a place in the meta right now. And she's more of a secondary kind of support or secondary carry as opposed to a primary carry. So he's the least contested at 19%. But he just doesn't really cap out well. So you never really want to be angling him unless you're going vertical portal. You have a portal envelope. Nami, no real place in the meta right now, not really played much. Her frequency did go up 2x. I suspect that's because she's played in vertical portal. But yeah, and then Nasus was the worst tank before and continues to be the worst tank now. His frequency did go up slightly because he can be played on the Karma board. You can flex him in there, but you would much rather have a Rakan than a Nasus. So that covers my overall kind of first glance picture of 1419. I suspect that a lot of this will change. Usually the meta evolves a lot over the first weekend. And so by middle of next week, we'll see a clearer picture. But this initial analysis can at least give us some baseline to work off of when we're thinking about playing our first few games. So if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments. If you have thoughts, hypotheses that maybe differ, additional ideas you would want to suggest, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment. Please let me also know if you like me kind of documenting my kind of just journey as far as how I'm doing in my games and maybe going over a high level assessment of the games that I've played. If that's something that you're interested in me doing, please let me know in the comments below as well. So thanks for watching this video and I'll see you in the next one.